Hello and welcome to the Reach Out for Mental Health podcast. I'm one half of your presenting duo. I'm Stu Whiffin. Joining me always, Kirsty Eaton. How are you, mate?
I'm good. You're looking awfully tanned.
Am I?
Really tanned. And you're not wearing the white t-shirt.
I did sit in a pub garden at the weekend, but I had my back to the sun. And so, yeah, just kind of, the back of my neck's really brown.
No, you're looking really Greek.
All right. Oh, okay.
And I'm just pasty and interesting as always.
Kirsty, would you like to introduce today's guest?
I would. I'd love to. Today we've got the wonderful, amusing, amazingly talented Brad, Mr. Grum Reaper. I don't know how you normally address yourself. How would you introduce yourself, Brad?
I used to just say Grum Reaper, but as Brad Grum Reaper Rumble, just because I was like, I used it as a mask, but then I was like, I can take the mask off now. I'm comfortable with myself.
Right, I'm not calling you Brad Grum Reaper Humble for the whole show.
No, just call me Brad. Just Brad will do, yeah.
Right, good. I could not have 40% of the podcast is just your name being repeated. So we all kind of sort of loosely know each other. Well, obviously I know Kirsty, but we all sort of have, I guess, grown up in the sort of wider peripheries of sort of Grays and Stamford, the areas that we sort of grew up in. I guess all of us flitting in and out of various alternative music scenes and art scenes, and more recently, I guess, podcast scenes. I know that Brad, you know some of my other friends that have done podcasts that are also, you know, very much within the sort of creative fields of where we live. We always start the podcast by saying, if I was to say to you the words mental health, what do you think?
Life experience, pretty much. Because I'm aware that mental health doesn't have to be bad. It can be good health. It can be bad health. I sort of differentiated between mental health and mental illness maybe like 5-6 years ago, realizing that, say, with mental health is like the software and the mental illness is the hardware. So if your hardware is broken, it's really hard to sort of recode. Whereas with mental health, you can recode that, so you can train your brain to be more healthier. You can perceive the world a bit healthier. So that's what mental health is to me, I think.
When was the first time that you thought maybe your mental health wasn't at a place that was probably healthy?
Probably about 15, to be honest with you. Like, there'd been sort of ins and outs of it over the years, but 15 was when it sort of became really apparent of like the chaos that was happening internally. Because from probably about 18, that is when everything started to spiral down, because I was perceiving, I got into like science and philosophy quite young, and seeing how the real world operated in quotes, and being told that this is how the real world is. It was a very uncompassionate place, and apathy was rife, and I just wasn't willing to accept that. There was a big part of me that's just like, no, I care about a lot of things, and being told that no, this is just the way things are was very it created like a lot of internal conflict. So it's probably between 18 to 22 where it really took a nosedive. Like, I always refer to those as the dark days, or the oily ooze days.
Can you just go back to the moment you said at sort of 15 it started to kind of sort of, you know, make itself apparent? What was happening at 15?
I just have really strong emotional reactions to things. Like, where other people would just be like, oh, it's all right, I'd be there like absolutely elated. Whereas if something was sort of just slightly saddening, then I'd be in complete despair about reality. Later on, I found out that was borderline personality disorder.
Yeah. Did you feel you could talk to anyone about it?
Nope, not at all. Like, my family was sort of very much like, hush, hush, don't talk about your emotions. And it was raw for me. Like, I couldn't hide my emotions. I couldn't mask it. It was just there constantly. And especially with like where we grew up as well, it's a very sort of hard place, like where you sort of have to be geezerish. I've since differentiated between geezerhood and manhood, because I see them as two very different things now. But Essex was is still very much a geezerhood. Like, you've got to be a bloke, you've got to sort of mistreat people and drink constantly. Yeah, that never sort of coalesced with who I was.
How long did it take for you to get your diagnosis of BPD, and how hard was that for you to get?
It took about 6 months in total. So I
Oh,
went to yeah, it's quite, because at the time the mental health services weren't chock-a-block, because things weren't so bad. Like, I was 19 when I got diagnosed, and that was 15 years ago. So I went to my GP, spoke to them about what I was feeling. Then they booked me in with like a drug group, because I was tattooing. You have to have a hepatitis jab when you tattoo. So they've obviously just seen that on my thing and assumed that I was a junkie, like I was like an addict. So they put me on this group, and I was like, I don't think I'm meant to be here. Like, this is the wrong group. So I went back to my GP, told them about that, and then I went to see a psychiatrist in Grays. And after about 2 sessions, I was like, yes, borderline personality disorder. Like, oh, okay, sweet.
So from 15 to 19, how did you manage?
I didn't. I was drinking. I say that I was drinking a lot, because at 15 we could still get drinks at the shops, because there was none of this like challenge 25 thing. And
those are the good old days.
But I was a chaos. I was a little piece of shit, to be quite frank. There was like this incongruence. Like, I realized now, looking back, that I probably was developing narcissistic tendencies to try and adapt to the world around me. But if I'd done
explain that a little wider, Brad.
So I'd go into shops and just steal alcohol. I wouldn't buy it. I basically take advantage of people, mistreat them, manipulate them. But because there was that was me trying to adapt to the real world. Like, this is being told this is the real world. And because I felt like shit about it, that's what, like, I started self-harming a lot. Like, my torso, legs, arms, they're all absolutely covered in scars. Luckily, I've not done that for like 9 years or so now. But at the time, there was this huge, like, I would be putting this mask on of like being a geezer, acting the way I saw other people acting, and it didn't align with who I actually was. So then I'd hate myself for doing it, and that was just not cool. Yeah, then it took a while to figure that out.
You said something really interesting. You said that you've since realised there's a difference between what you call geezerhood and manhood. Can you sort of explain that a little bit?
Yeah, so geezerhood to me is like refusing to talk about your emotions, which I now see as a sort of, it's a revelation of insecurity. Like, you're so afraid of what other people are going to think of you that you have to hide your emotions, which to me isn't manly, if that makes sense. Like, because manliness to me is being brave. It's doing the right thing, even in the face of like conflict or someone going against you. But I sort of, because I realized that, I started to rebel against it by just being like, no, I am having an emotional response, and then sort of become quite aggressive if people would try and take the piss out of me. I'd literally say to them like, oh, the only reason you're trying to take the piss is because you actually want to show your emotions, but everyone around you has made you feel ashamed about it to the point where you can't feel your emotions.
That's a reaction that most people I've grown up around in our hometowns probably wouldn't take kindly to that.
Yeah,
you're essentially hitting them with some truths, essentially, you know.
Yeah.
And you know, they're truths that aggressive alpha types in where we live do not want to be told their fortune like that. And yeah, I can imagine that could have been problematic.
Yeah, it's like there's definitely been a few people that I've met and they're coked up and they were clearly hit by what I was saying, because it's essentially, geezerhood is the refusal to become a man, really, because you're still a boy. Like, if you're worried about what other people are thinking of you, then that means you're not going to be honest. It means you're going to sort of try and hide that as much as possible. And that is still quite childish. Whereas if you're a man and you have these, like, you have a strong moral integrity, you're going to speak your mind regardless of what other people are going to think of you. But obviously, I think that's been taken by some of the alpha male lot, like Andrew Tate and people like that, to then try and push misogynistic ideas onto reality. But even misogyny is a revelation of thinking that women are somehow weak. And it's just like, that comes from their own childhood of being told, oh, don't be a little girl, like these sorts of things. So they've internalized that to the point where they're now chauvinistic and misogynistic, because they think, oh, if I show my emotions, that means I'm a girl, and by default, that means I'm weak. Then that stays in their mindset until they get into adulthood.
Can you empathize and understand why some men do find it difficult to talk about their emotions? I understand what you're saying about emotional integrity and you know, being able to talk about your emotions, you know, being a great display of strength and bravery and courage. But you can understand why society today makes it incredibly challenging for men to do that.
Yeah, it's bloody terrifying. Because in order to really feel your emotions, you have to work through all of those insecurities first, to then be able to go, oh, this is actually what I'm feeling, rather than go, this is what I need to present. And I know, because that's what I used to do myself. Like, it is just genuinely terrifying. And obviously, like, if you think where, say you're on a building site, the last thing, it's like this tribal identity of like, oh, I'm going to act like this, I'm going to be like this. If I act outside of that, then that means I become an outcast. And then that just targets that sort of really primal need for a tribe. Because if you're cast out, that potentially could mean death. And that's still in the brain, like really deep down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you find, you know, from knowing you as a young lad, you know, you was very much part of a sort of an alternative scene, and I think some people would look in, maybe some, you know, some of the people that you've just sort of described really would look in on that scene and just think they're all a bit arty and, you know, a little bit weird, and all of them kind of cliches that get sort of thrown at that sort of subculture. Would you find, you know, finding your sort of tribe a little bit with an alternative scene where maybe you know, shared a mutual love of certain music and, you know, and art or whatever, did you feel that within them kind of communities you could sort of talk about your feelings comfortably and be understood and heard?
Interesting. I don't think so. I still feel like a lot of that mentality was sort of permeated still within like the grunge, goth, emo crowd. Obviously emos, they'd listen to music and they was able to listen to someone else telling them via music. But I think geographically it was still very much like hidden away, like don't talk about your emotions sort of thing. Because there's, especially in the alternative crowd, or back then at least, it was like, I don't give a shit about what society thinks, to the point where it's become like overcompensation.
Right.
Like I don't care, but then that's just apathy. But if for instance, I used to listen to like electro music as well, and within that alternative crowd at the time, if I was to reveal that, and then I'd be getting told, oh, it's not real music, like you're not a real grunger, all this sort of thing. I'm just like, but I'm one of the weirdos like you guys, like, and I like being weird.
Take me in, come on. Yeah. I'm one of you.
But that was just, I think that was mostly like my own alienation growing up, like feeling like an oddball, and then I'd just feel like an oddball everywhere.
Have you not found your tribe yet?
Yeah, I've got my own little tribe now. It's probably about 16 of us, and there was a moment maybe last year, probably about 2 years ago actually, where it was me and 4 of the other guys, and we are openly talking about our emotions, and I just had to take a step back for a moment and just really look at them and just be like, wow, like this is, I think that was then what solidified to me what I define as a real man, air quotes again, because like some of us were really sort of stressed and concerned and anxious about things, and as a result, we ended up going to like, some of us went to therapy and really started to work through things, but then we discussed that sort of thing amongst ourselves. And there were like, some of us had good upbringings, but then that obviously, if you have an upbringing where you're constantly supported, there's this expectation to be a high succeeder, and within that itself there's a stress.
Yeah.
But if you're from a family where it's sort of a very toxic environment, obviously that comes with its own caveats of mental health problems, emotional problems, all these sorts of things. But it was just in the open conversations we have amongst ourselves is just phenomenal. Like, we really do open up. Like, even on Sunday, my friend Venus came round and we just spent the entire day just talking about like people that have essentially abused us in the past and sort of worked through that together.
Quite a cathartic and healing conversation, I can imagine that would be.
Yeah, we're sort of like half punk, half hippie. It's a good little tribe.
I mean, the areas that we live in are very much working class. Do you feel that class can sometimes hinder people's sort of or fuel that reluctance to open up and show any sort of vulnerability?
I think so, yeah, because within your own class like structure, there are all these unwritten rules of how you're meant to behave, and those rules then become, it's like a sociological condition by which then we exist. Like, I live in Norwich now, and I've lived here for about 4.5 years or so, and it's so different here. It's so different here. It's a really good analogy that I sort of tell people when trying to describe the difference between a hometown and Norwich, and then I'll throw in London for a good mix as well. Basically, London, Essex, if you fall over in the street, you're pretty safe in the knowledge that no one's going to really help you out. Like, there might be 5 or 6 people that walk past, and then the 7th person tries to help, right? Whereas in Norwich, I've seen this happen. Someone will fall over and everyone around will rush to help them, to the point where there's like a swath of people that have to sort of be like, oh, like, we're doing more hindrance than good here, so we just have to walk away. Like, there's more people that will help you up here than will just walk past you, sort of thing. And I
feel like we need to do a social experiment, Brad. I feel like you need to come down here, put on some knee pads. Honestly, I'll sit in a shop with a camera and we'll just see, because that makes me so sad to think that being true.
There is a test you can do. It's mostly a personal test where you just go onto a high street and lay on the floor. That's literally all you do. There's no danger to it, there's no harm to it, but it really tests how your anxiety works, because some people they just can't do it, and it's just laying down on the floor. But then other people can do it because maybe they've been in show business.
It's weird. I was sort of 10 minutes from Norwich this weekend, and I've spent a lot of time in Norwich as well. And I had the conversation yesterday, walking into I was staying in a small town called Halsden, and it's beautiful, a million miles from where I live, and in how it is, not geographically. But I just got up in the morning and I went into town to get a coffee, and I think I counted 12 people that said good morning to me. I could walk for 10 miles where I live,
dog with you at the time,
and not one person would say good morning to me.
Yeah.
Right. And if I said good morning to somebody, I genuinely feel they will probably be a little bit uncomfortable with it. What's he after? What is he doing?
Yeah.
And I think, and it's really weird, because I have these kind of conversations in some of these sort of small, villages and towns in Norfolk and Suffolk, which ultimately I think I'll find myself living in. There's an element of sort of small town thinking. I've had conversations. I go there a lot, and I've had conversations where people will talk, and they'll ask me what I do, and I say, I run like nightclubs, and they're like, oh, where? And I said, oh, in Essex and in London. London? You run clubs in London? And I'm like, yeah. and I think it's 50 minutes on a train from you, and but their world is so small, and I've watched lots of my friends that have moved there, and I've watched their. And they're quite alpha as well, and they're very geezery, and I've watched them, their worlds change through moving to places like that. And
you've seen them soften in themselves.
Completely. And I was with them yesterday, and I was like, this is wonderful. And it's really weird, because I think when you look at people that live in, you know, these small villages, and not all of them, but some of them have that kind of, you know, their world becomes smaller, and everything is based around their community, and there's something really beautiful about that. But I also find that there's something a little bit, I worry how that would have an effect on some like me, because there's lots of things I'd like to do that are far wider than the immediate community. But then you just think, if they're happy, they're winning, right?
Yeah. Although, so I sort of adhere to this idea of balance, because my emotions are so up and down constantly. I try not to make the desire happiness, because if you spend a day unhappy, then you lose, and it's not about winning.
That's great.
And it's like, if you was constantly striving for happiness, imagine it's a roller coaster, right? If you was going up all the time, it would be the shittest roller coaster. You know, where's the drop? Where's the drop? And you need that contrast between them both to really know what the other feels like, or to really know what you're feeling. Because like it's just an allowance to feel things. Like with BPD, the best way to explain it is your emotions are the same as everybody else's emotions. Sometimes our own paranoia or psyche can get in the way and really amp those emotions up, but they're just stronger. So where most people would exist on, say, a 4 to 6 on an average day, with 5 being completely neutral, and then something disastrous happens or something really joyous happens, they'll go up to maybe like 8 or a 2. Well, for BPD, every single day, every single thing is either a 0 to 10. So you're flipping between those constantly. And where you're surrounded by people on 6 to 4, that can seem really over the top. So people tell you, oh, you're overreacting. So now I've coined this term of underreacting. It's like, you're underreacting, like it's a beautiful day. Like, what's there not to cry your eyes out about? So there's a cloud there, it looks like a flower. But that sort of, yeah.
That's like I'm looking in the mirror. Jesus Christ.
It's just the balance between light and the dark. But the greater you allow yourself to feel either one, it's just that you're allowing yourself to feel. But a lot of the time we try and cut ourselves off from feeling bad. So if we cut that off, we also cut off the ability to feel really good. But the deeper you the deeper you allow yourself, which also depends upon your sociological conditions, right? Just the more you get to feel.
What are your thoughts on medication, Brad?
So I used to be sort of very anti-medication, because the ones they put me on fluoxetine many moons ago, and that just killed all my creativity, and art to me is like an outlet.
Did you by that, do you mean it leveled that roller coaster?
Yeah, it just seemed to numb. Obviously, to me, being restricted to 6 to 4 is numbing, right? Because I'm so used to 0 to 10. But probably about 2 months ago, because I'm at uni and I was quite stressed, I just went, and I had sciatica. I went to the doctors and was like, "This is what I'm feeling. Like, I'm a bit anxious because I can't do the things that I would want to do because of the sciatica and uni." They put me on amitriptyline, which, see, that's everyone I've told has had that reaction, but it's actually the best medication I've ever had with regards to prescription-based drugs. It just boosts your serotonin and dopamine, as well as basically it targets like your nervous system a bit. So it done the double whammy of helping out with the sciatica because it didn't hurt so much, but it also just helped with the regulation of those emotions, so they're not as sort of crazy. Rather than numbing it to 6.4, it's probably about 3.8, I reckon. Is that the right up and down?
3.7.
3.7, yeah. Wait,
Did
no.
you not?
I don't know, yeah.
Did you not feel quite foggy?
So the first few days I woke up foggy, but I was an old stoner, so that's nothing new. But the dreams, the trip part of amitriptyline is probably the most key word to it, because my dreams since I started taking it 2 months ago have become mental. Like I wake up every morning after like a lucid dream, and I'll like turn to my girlfriend or I'll text like group chat with my tribe and just explain the dreams I've had, and people are like, what the fuck, dude? Like that is crazy. But obviously dreams are crazy, but having them so vividly every single night and then waking up to a new reality, which is this reality, is I kind of love it. But obviously, like, I think for a lot of people, they're having nightmares, so then that makes it worse as well. But I've never adhered to the idea. I don't call them nightmares. I'll just say it's just a weird dream. But because I think I wake up and realize it was just a dream.
How much control have you got over your lucid dreaming then?
Only a little bit at the moment. Like if I see things that are happening that are bad, I can basically make the decision to turn the other way, or it's almost realizing that it's a dream, so it's no longer a threat. So I'll just sort of continue letting it play out.
Yeah, it's fascinating, lucid dreaming. I think there's a lot to be learned from that. And
do you have lucid dreams, Stu? Can you kind of have an awakened dream?
I'm pretty much where Brad is.
Wow.
I'm at the point where if something, I do this thing where I wake up and I wake myself up making this horrific noise, and it's like, if you've ever seen the film Bone Tomahawk, there's a really strange sound that these kind of cannibals make, and I make that noise in my sleep. It's fucking terrifying.
Can you do that noise?
And then Carol reaches over and tries to smother you with a pillow.
Pretty much. But I do it with both my hands in the air. Like it's really weird. I literally done it when I was camping 2 weeks ago.
Is it like a power stance sort of thing?
No, most of the time I'm doing that. I rub my inner elbow. It's very odd. And when it happens, my dream is in a really horrific place where I'm generally being attacked, and then I can control that. And I hear that noise and I can control it, and I can sort of tell myself that it's a dream, and kind of, like you say, sort of continue with the journey of the dream. But Chris, who I do the Hardcore Listing podcast with, he's been lucid dreaming for years and years, and he's literally just goes on the most surreal adventures that that he can literally lead himself through, like on the regular. It's very very fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah, he doesn't make any fucking horrific noises and wakes up the whole of a campsite on Brightling Sea at 3 a.m. Oh dear. So have you never sort of experienced that at all, Kirst?
Slightly, very, very occasionally. So I used to have quite a lot of flying dreams, funnily enough. Yeah, something that I really used to enjoy is a really good flying dream, and I used to be able to take control of those. And obviously it's a lot to do with where you're at personally, within your own circumstances and your own mental health and your own situation, which will dictate what you're dreaming about and how you feel and how those things play out. I don't know if it's because I'm now living on water, but yeah, don't fly so much now, sadly.
See, that's something interesting, because like when it comes to dreams, I've never adhered to the idea. Obviously there's certain symbolism, but I've never adhered to a universal like idea that dreams mean something. Because if you were to try and decipher my dreams, you'd be like, are you afraid of cupboards, or like Mr. Bean, or like, I think like a lot of the dream analysis is based in Freud, right? And Freud has pretty much been poo-pooed by a lot of modern psychology. A lot of psychology nowadays is more focused on Carl Jung.
I mean,
also done
dreams
Dreaming App.
are more about the feeling. So it's not necessarily about the content or the symbolism.
Okay.
It's about your feelings and how you felt in that situation. That should be the takeaway, and that's what you want to be kind of digging into and looking at what that could mean on a subconscious level. That's just
Okay.
what I've read.
On that, have either of you been hypnotized?
Don't think I can be.
No.
Oh, really?
I'm a massive control freak. You know me. No way.
But by you very much. So by you saying that means that you will be the most susceptible by a mile. 100%,
Really?
100%. Like, and obviously it puts you in that state, of, you know, rapid eye movement, and your subconscious is raised, and I find it. You know, I've not been hypnotized for maybe 3 years now, but I used to have it maybe twice a month for years and years and years.
Whoa.
And
Why was that? Why would you want to do that?
because I got stage fright, and I got stage fright when I was in a front in a very outrageous band, and yeah, I was absolutely terrified of getting on stage, and so I had hypnosis to kind of make me feel confident on stage, and it definitely worked. And the person that hypnotized me, it's definitely a mutual friend of mine and Brad's. It was his mum that done it. I'll talk about him afterwards, but
Brad's mum?
No, a mutual friend, somebody that Brad and I know, from very much from part of the sort of scene that I met Brad in. But yeah, I think there's lots to be gained from that, and I don't know if it's, what's your experience, Kirst, of knowing if you know, in regards to sort of the, you know, the world of mental health and well-being, if there's, you know, been much focus on the benefits or not benefits of hypnosis, because it's pretty.
I haven't even considered it until about 7.5 seconds ago.
Yeah.
Genuinely, I'm sitting there thinking I might, you know, stick a pin in therapy for now and go and get myself put under or put down. I don't know. It might be easy to put me down. But yeah, hypnosis. I've never considered that as a way of managing anxiety or anything like that. That's
It's all planting triggers, you know, and planting them little kind of moments that when something happens, you kind of have a default setting in your subconscious that kind of pings it over to something more comfortable and more, you know, I don't know. It's only just talking about lucid dreaming made me think of it, and we've never really discussed it as to if there was any benefits in the world of, you know.
On the topic of hypnosis, it was actually Darren Brown who helped me realize that the brain can be reconditioned, like you can recondition it to have better responses to things. It was his Hero at 30,000 feet where he helped, he was terrified of flying. He essentially hypnotized him during sleep and done all of these like implanting things, which then resulted in him landing or stepping up to land a plane and then put in a simulation where he actually lands the plane. And I watched that, and there was this moment where the guy goes to a local park and he journals for like 5 hours. And like I started journaling shortly after that to try and figure out what was going on in my brain. But having that seed planted that the brain can be reconditioned, and hypnosis is one of those methods where it can be reconditioned, is very, very powerful. And that I think that was the first plant that changed the trajectory of like my downward spiral.
Wow. So did you find that was helping more than meds? Are you still taking medication, or?
So I think at that point I tried to get it was basically I got put on fluoxetine, and then it was shortly after that where I had one of my first suicide attempts. So it wasn't working for me.
And how did that suicide attempt, how did you get over that? What did your recovery look like? Who helped you along with that?
So the event itself, I tried to, as in East Tilbury, went to jump in front of a train, but it's 3 a.m, no trains. Comical. But because there was no trains, I ended up getting a smashed bottle and trying to cut my wrist with that, like really going for it, like really stabbing it into my wrist. Nice graphic image for you. But somebody on CCTV saw me doing this because obviously someone on the train station at 3 a.m. looked suspicious, sort of thing. And the next thing I know, there's police by my side and then an ambulance. And they take me to the ward in Basildon, and I met a few people. I think I stayed in there for about a week or so. But it was meeting a few people in there which began to change the trajectory. So there was one guy whose family came to visit him, and he didn't recognize them to the point that he threatened them, sort of thing.
Sorry, Brad, can I just interject? Was this in a normal, was this just a ward, just having your, you know, your wrist being looked at, or was you put in?
Oh no, sorry, this was on the mental ward in Basildon.
Right,
Yeah,
okay.
so they put me, I don't know what they called it anymore, sectioning. But so there was this guy who didn't recognize his own family, who was aggressive to him. So I saw that and reflected upon myself and was like, well, I'm not that far gone to not recognize reality that much. So that was the first seed. Then it's talking to a few other suicide survivors, and they all suffered from depression. And the resounding story that was being told to me by them was not that their depression was the bad thing, it was they was being mistreated by those around them. So that planted this seed of like, there's not something wrong with these people, it's something wrong with the way society treats these people that has made them feel worthless to the point of wanting to slip this mortal coil. And then there was a guy who he knew, he basically told me he thought someone was after him, but knew nobody was after him. But he put himself into the ward because at least that way he knows he's safe. Despite he knew it's paranoia to the point that, so it's like, oh, you can be aware of your mind to that level. And then the fourth one was this old dear that I was smoking at the time, and I was here on a ward, and there's like 3 days without a cigarette. I'm like, oh, I really want a cigarette, really want a cigarette. And she passes me this pack of Kleenex out of her pocket, and inside the Kleenex was a lighter and loads of little rollies. And I was like, then they don't let you outside to smoke. She's like, just go into the toilet, lock it behind you, and just smoke in there. And I was like, yeah, but what if they catch you? And she was like, what are they going to do? Put you in a loony bin? I was like, oh, yeah. So that then planted this seed that the rules in place aren't necessarily there to be followed. They're there to just sort of keep you on a straight line. Hence the reason why we call it a ruler, because it's a straight line, right? So it's like, oh, so we can circumvent them, or we can bend them so far back that we come back in a sort of circle, but we're sort of on the same line. But it was those seeds that it was talking to them that I realized that I wanted to help people. I wanted to help. In order to help people, I needed to first understand my own mind, I need to understand the human condition itself. So then I started reading philosophy, psychology, anthropology, and sociology. Like all these different sort of books came to me. And it was through them that I sort of realized the human condition is an emotional one, but based upon our upbringings, we all start to translate the surface issue as the issue. Like the way, I think the best way of describing the oppositions of how we feel is by using fear, for instance, right? So fear and love, both simultaneous, like they exist on the exact same coin, where if you compare someone who's like your typical Britain first, I hate bloody foreigners type, yeah, and a refugee, they are complete opposites of the spectrum, right? But the fear that they both feel it exactly the same. They both feel that their home is under threat, so they're trying to get out of that place, or they're trying to save that place from being destroyed. So the fear they feel is exactly the same fear, but the fear they feel is for their loved ones as well as themselves. So it's just like both of those people have the strength of their emotions are so in common. All of the sociological conditionings around, say, the Britain First type has told them to hate. Whereas the refugees, it's not about hate, it's about hope. So that's the only time that they're sort of opposed.
Really interesting. Really interesting. Talk about, if you can, like, tell us a little bit about kind of bringing it more up to now. And you know, you mentioned before we started recording that you'd found a tribe, and things were more positive. Talk about, you know, Brad and the last sort of few years really, and your journey.
So the trajectory really started when I broke down the breakdown of my 10-year relationship, which I'd been in since I was 19, 20 years old or so. And I sort of thought to myself, well, what now? Like, you sort of have all these hopes and dreams of what your future is going to be, and then it's all sort of torn apart from you. And then just watching Money Saving Expert, he was doing a talk about how much uni actually costs. And I was like, oh wait, you don't actually pay it back until you earn over a certain amount. I've been lied to. So I decided to come to university because I was meant to do that before I got with my partner at the time. And I originally came to do illustration because obviously there's still this mentality of you've got to get a real job, especially in Essex. You've got to get a real job, and being an artist is not a real job. So I thought illustration is a way to get in a job as an artist. And it was after my first year where all of the tutors were basically saying to me, like, you're very subversive. Like, you'll take the design brief and you'll twist it and turn it as far as possible to meet the brief, but it meets what you want to do. And it's through that when I was like, oh, so I am actually a bloody artist. And then in the summers between the 2 years of university, I was sort of going to festivals and just really experiencing things I hadn't experienced before. Like, prior to that, I'd never been to a festival. Then I'd go to these festivals, and then psychedelics entered the fray. And I remember my first trip, it was after study. So I've been meditating for a while, probably about 6 months before I'd ever taken anything. And I read a study 2 days before psychedelics even across my path, where they was starting trials to use psilocybin to treat depression. And those trials are still ongoing in the UK. So,
And is that a psychedelic?
yeah, magic mushrooms.
Right.
So 2 days after that, I went to a party in Southend, and someone just offered me acid, and I'd literally never in my life had ever had anyone offer me psychedelics. So I was like, okay, let's try this out. Tried it. First 3 hours, I'm just there seeing the world fold in on itself, and then I took it really like late, like probably about 3 a.m., which is not the time to take psychedelics, but it was on the train back. I'm just staring out the window and I'm seeing these data streams form on all the water droplets from the rain. Obviously, the train ride back through on the C2C line from Southend to like Stamford Tilbury Way is actually quite picturesque. It's really nice, just sort of like looking out onto the river. And when I got home, I watched Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. I finally thought like I understood it. I'd watched it before, but I had never done acid. So I was like, oh, this doesn't make sense to me. Then it made sense to me. And then there was this, I think I put Alan Watts on because I've been listening to him for years anyway to sort of calm my mind down. At this point, I was very depressed. I was still out of a 10-year relationship. Don't know where the hell my life is going, really. And I had this internal conversation with myself, and it went like, just out of nowhere, it just went, you're not depressed, right? I was like, what? I've had a diagnosis. I've always been depressed. It's like, no. Because you was told you have depression, now anytime you have a sad day, you identify with the depression and then you become it. So it's now formed part of your identity, but it's not part of who you are. It's what you feel. And after that, it just sort of dwindled away. And that was 4 years ago, and I haven't been depressed since. There's plenty of things that in the past, like I've experienced that in the past would have made me depressed, but it was seeing that I'd identified with it that sort of allowed it to sort of float away a bit. And then obviously like journaling and therapy and everything else after that just changed. So I'm having a slight reminisce on the moment there as well. Yeah, because it was pretty wild. Don't do drugs.
That's really interesting.
I love it. I find the whole around using psychedelics to manage mental health, utterly fascinating. I mean, I loved Nine Perfect Strangers. That was absolutely amazing. Since then I've read, various.
Oh, Kirsty, we're losing you. Your Wi-Fi's seems to have kind of frozen on us.
On the old satellite.
Right. Yeah, you need to come move your aerial. I'm just going to quickly message you in case you can't hear this. So have you found, Brad, that have you sort of continued with sort of psychedelics to sort of, I guess, I don't know, sort of continue that sort of place that you're in where you feel, I'm not suggesting you're just absolutely out of your mind 24/7 and haven't come down for the last 4 years.
No, when I first started, because it was sort of novel, there was a novelty to it as well. So obviously I'd do it at like festivals, but the most revelatory trips I had were on my own, where I'd be sort of sat there listening to like meditation music. I'd have my journal in front of me. Not that I could write clearly, like that thing was moving and swirling around like crazy. But I think it's definitely played an integral part of my transformation. But also, I think reading up on the subjects I had before about the mind and the studies of human consciousness, that ultimately helped as well, because I've seen people that haven't had that sort of interest before or had that level of understanding of themselves go really bad on psychedelics, like completely lose their mind. And it's just like, oh, that if I'd have done it when I was 18, that would have been me. I'd have lost my mind and probably ended up in a ward sooner. But the novelty wore off as I started making a lot more progress in my own psyche. So it's only like maybe over the past 2 years, like I stopped probably about 18 months or so ago. Actually, no, it's 2 years ago. I stopped 2 years ago after a very bad trip. Panic attack, lasted 5 hours, 6 hours.
Wow.
And then I didn't touch it again until I went to see Osric Technicals. Then I took some shrooms and it was amazing. Yeah, it was just like a hit. Like, I think mushrooms are better because it's more grounding, whereas LSD is hyper reality, feel like you're talking to higher dimensional beings, that sort of thing. Which obviously, there's this weird dichotomy in my brain where I'll hold both beliefs of like, there's part of me that's spiritual, but there's part of me which is existential. So it's just like, I'll hold both beliefs because ultimately there's no way to know. There's no way to really confirm if either is true. So I'll just hold both.
Yeah. So what's ahead? What's coming up? What's happening for Brad moving forwards?
So I've just finished a year in creative computing, which was a sandwich year between years 2 and 3 of fine art. So I've got my final year of fine art to do. I've also got art battles on 1st of July in London. That's basically about 5 or 6 artists, I think it is. We each get a canvas and we get 20 minutes to paint it. And then people in the venue do live voting on who wins, or they can live auction on your work. I'm currently just really working on my digital sculpting because I want to do virtual reality art. I've already built a VR app that we're going to be using for GradFest at the uni. A year ago, I didn't have any idea how to make anything in VR. I thought it was like some super techie, mind-blowing, can't do that sort of thing. And then about a month ago, I spent three weeks working 10-12 hours a day on it, and realized, oh, this is something I can work that much on.
Yeah.
With paintings, it's more so like a spur of the moment when inspiration strikes, whereas this, because it's methodical, because you have to know bits of code, different parts of 3D modeling, there's constantly challenges to work towards. And I think that that's part of my future, is sort of publicly engaged work that sort of shares ideas about that universality of emotion.
Yeah,
because that's we're constantly trying to sew and bridge the divide between everyone, but everyone seems to be talking about stuff on the surface, and it's deeper than that. It is just the emotions. Like, we each feel our emotions exactly the same as one another. It's just like, how do we get people to realize that and recognize that it's so, like, about the vulnerability. It's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to be pissed off about things as well. Like, there's indignant rage. Like, if you're pissed off about the way things are in the world, you can use that anger to fuel change. So it's good to be pissed off. But I think what's happened in the past few years, I think, like, society normally follows these trends, right? So if you look back to the 60s, it's like the swinging 60s, hippie. And what came after that was punk, right? Because the punk saw that the lovey-dovey way didn't work.
Well, there was a very pioneering punk that, to coin his phrase, that very much aligns itself with what you said, and then words for anger is an energy.
Yeah.
And, that was, one of Lydon's, greatest moments in Public Image Limited. And, anger is a fucking energy.
Yeah, it is. And it's, choose what you get pissed off about. Like, if you're pissed off about something because it's morally wrong, be pissed off. It's the best thing to be, like, because that's the only way that change happens. You can't sort of hug your way out of a brawl. Sometimes you have to throw a few sledgehammers about.
Just to throw something in there then, for any listeners that happen to find themselves in confrontation, this podcast does not endorse throwing sledgehammers at them.
Yeah, exactly. I've literally never thrown a sledgehammer. I've watched Game of Thrones recently. I think that maybe have had an effect on my brain.
Brad, if people want to find out about your art and everything that you're up to, is there a website or a social media link that people can go and get a real visual on what you're doing?
Yeah, if you go to grumreaper.com, which is GRUMREAPUR, that's pretty much everything. It's got all the blogs and stuff that I've written about. There's links to my work and galleries and bio and CV and all that sort of stuff. But you can find me on Instagram under the same title anyway. All the links are on my website. But yeah, it's all just Grum Reaper.
Wonderful, Brad. We'll put the web address in the show notes to this, so people can go and click it and go and look right now. Unfortunately, I've just had a message from Kirsty that her Wi-Fi is so shit on her boat that she can't rejoin this call. But on behalf of her and me, honestly, mate, it's been really lovely talking to you and getting a completely different perspective on your journey and mental health than we've had previously. It's been really interesting. Thank you.
It was sorry, I've just reminded myself there's one thing that I did want to bring up.
Okay.
The poster in your background, Scroob, his song Magician's Assistant.
This is Scroobius Pip, I should point out. He's a picture behind my head on the Zoom call, who's obviously from our hometown.
Or David. He, like, I've told him this in person, because obviously you bump into him around town, sort of thing. But his song Magician's Assistant, you know the one?
Of course.
That stopped me self-harming. Like, the first time I heard it, I bawled my eyes out, and I listened to it like on repeat for days on end. And it was discovering that track and listening to it that much that just completely stopped me self-harming. I haven't self-harmed since, and I think that was about 10 years ago I heard that. Yeah. I just wanted to say that because obviously you know him, and like I think you're a big fan of his, so I thought I'd just pass that on a bit,
Yeah, absolutely. He's a mate. I'm not going to say I'm a fan of his now. Like that his ego don't need that. No, and you know what? Like it is strange because he is a friend, and every now and again, because we never really talk about music, we just talk about MMA and the things that we really love. Every now and again, and it happened when I saw the video to You Will See Me, I was like, my mate's fucking great.
That song as well, You Will See Me, that was what I listened to on repeat after the breakdown of my 10-year relationship.
Yeah.
It was after that where I really started driving forward with things.
Yeah.
That may have also changed the trajectory of me coming to university as well.
Yeah.
Like a fire up my ass.
Yeah. He's good at that stuff.
Yeah, yeah. But that's again, like, it's the power of vulnerability, because you've got to be vulnerable to write that shit, right?
Yeah.
He's putting himself out there. It's like, Jesus Christ. He's like, this is speaking to the very depths of my psyche, you know?
Yeah. That's not an easy thing to do, is it?
No, no.
Like, especially yours. Like, oh, Brad, honestly, mate, I could talk to you for hours. It's been really interesting. It's the first time we've known each other for a long time, you know, loosely on the sort of peripheries of the places that we've frequented. It's been really nice to kind of just have a really sort of open conversation with you, and you kind of, you know, be really open and vulnerable and kind. It's been lovely.
Well, it's sort of like seeing someone go from a kid to being an adult, really, isn't it? Because that is, I suppose, the length of time that you've known me from. You saw me like when I was just turning 18, going to surfer, all the way to now, man. That's pretty. It's great. It's great. I've been watching your trajectory. It's been amazing, man. Like, just seeing everything you're doing, I'm just like, yeah, this guy's sick. Yeah, and you look good as well. Like, you've aged like a fine wine.
Is that you complimenting the graininess in my beard?
Yeah. I mean, I'm 34, dude. I've had grey and beard for like 5 years, but I don't have the glory of hair anymore, man. Like, that's gone. Bye.
Oh, mate, there's a reason I've not sort of leaned too far forward, because you'll see that it is going there. But I'm 50, mate. I can embrace it now. Yeah. And if it makes you feel any better, Scroobius Pip's beard's getting very, very grey as well. So it happens to the best of us, mate. Brad, thanks loads, mate. I'm going to press stop. Don't go anywhere.